A freilichen Purim, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shir. Kaida b'kol, l'chaim, l'simcha, l'shalom. Everyone should have a freilichen Purim. Everyone should have simcha and nachas and everything wonderful. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'akol niheh b'dvarei. L'chaim tovim u'l'shalom. When you listen to the Megillah, you hear the reading of the Megillah. You know, the truth is that at the outset of the Megillah, there are a lot of things that we listen to the story of the Megillah, we talk about the story of the Megillah, and we celebrate some of these things that happened in the beginning of the Megillah, but that's only because we know the end of the story. Without knowing the end of the story, some of the things that take place in the beginning of the Megillah are actually quite horrible. Achashverosh makes this party. The Chazal tell us that at the party, he took out the kelim from the Beis Hamikdash. He was celebrating the fact that, according to his calculations, the 70 years of the Golus were over, and Klal Yisrael was not nigal. The Geula did not yet arrive. Gefährlich. Imagine, the king is making a party to celebrate the downfall of Klal Yisrael, to celebrate the fact that the Geula hasn't come. Then the Melech gets into a spat with his wife, Vashti. He kills Vashti. Okay, at first glance, doesn't have that much to do with us. What happens? So then comes up this crazy plan that the Avdei HaMelech have, and we have here, turn the pages. Vayomru nari HaMelech b'sharasav yivakshu LaMelech na'aros besulos tovos mara. Imagine. They're going scouring throughout the kingdom, taking all the na'aros, besulos, tovos mara. We want to find a girl fit for the king. And they go ahead and they take Esther. Now Esther, Pashtus, she wasn't a besula, she wasn't a naira. How old she was, question. It's a matter of dispute exactly how old she was. Seems she wasn't a youngster. Why should she be taken? And yet she is taken. Now, is that happy? You think Mordechai was happy? You think Esther was happy? It's gefährlich. Gefährlich, a tragedy. Esther was taken to the Beis HaMelech. Okay? She goes to the Beis HaMelech, and guess what happens? Instead of her kind of, vanishing into the back somewhere and trying to get ignored, maybe she tried to get ignored, but what happens? Right away, suddenly Esther somehow ends up being the favorite over here. They're paying a tremendous amount of attention to this Esther. You think Esther was happy about this? Esther wasn't happy about this. Then Esther was probably being mispal on a constant basis that some girl that comes before her should be chosen by Achashverosh and she should be free to go back home. It's not what happens. Right? And very specifically, she didn't ask for anything. Loi biksha davar. I don't want anything to bring with me. Right? If anything, she probably wanted, give me some terrible smelling perfume and make me look ugly and give me some cosmetics that I'll have an allergic reaction to, so I should break out in hives, and Achashverosh shouldn't want to look twice at me. Instead, Vayahav HaMelech es Esther mikol hanoshav v'tisached v'chesed lefanav mikol habesulos. Even though she wasn't one. But still, doesn't matter. Tisached lefanav mikol habesulos. And then, not only does Achashverosh fall head over heels for her, he doesn't say, well, let me try out the rest of the batch. Maybe I'll find one even better. No, right away. Vayasim kesam malchus beroisha vayamlicheh tachas Vashti. Was Esther happy about this? Was Mordechai happy about this? This looked like a tragedy. It looked like a terrible tragedy. Now, we know the end of the story. Because we know the end of the story, we know that the Ribbono Shel Olam, Hashgacha Pratis, the Ribbono Shel Olam was manipulating everything completely for our benefit. Even though at the end of the day, the one who does not have a happy ending at the end of the Megillah is Esther. Esther doesn't have a happy ending. Esther is still in the Beis HaMalchus. Right? She's still in the Beis HaMelech. So she doesn't. It seems that Esther is the one carbon. Esther is the carbon that maybe brought about kapara, helped bring about kapara for Klal Yisrael. But she doesn't seem to have a happy ending. But one thing that I'm trying to show you is that as you go through the story of the Megillah, you realize that there are a lot of things that at face value, besides just the terrible gzera of Achashverosh, but even other things like Esther being taken to the Beis HaMalchus, it looks gefährlich, it sounds gefährlich. But when we come to the end of the Megillah, we realize that the Rabbeinu Shalom was pulling the strings all along, the Rabbeinu Shalom was engineering everything, and everything was 100% for our benefit. Rabbi Sai, today is Purim. There are a lot of scary and dangerous things going on in the world. But I believe that today is not a day for a frown. Today is not a day for worry. Today is not a day for concern. Today is a day for tefillah. Say over for my cousin, Rabbi Asher in Eretz Yisrael, who gave a little shmooze about Purim. And he said that on Purim, we know, the Chazal tell us, Ein medaktikin b'mois Purim. We learned this together, Rabbi Isai, when we learned Hilchos Megillah. Ein medaktikin b'mois Purim. When somebody comes to ask you if it's stuck on Purim, Ein medaktikin. We don't search into him. Is he royal lekach? Is he not royal lekach? Instead, kol haposhit yada yinasin lo. Anybody who stretches out his hand, you give him. My cousin brought down the same concept exists between Klal Yisrael and the Rabbeinu Shalom. Today, kol haposhit yada yinasin lo. Ein medaktikin. If you come to the Rabbeinu Shalom today and you're mispal, today is mesugel for tefillah, and mesugel for the Rabbeinu Shalom to accept your tefillahs. Today is not a day to get drunk like a skunk, to get shikker, and daven a shvacha mincha. Today is not a day to have a shvacha birkas hamazon. Today is not a shvacha day, it's already too late, probably by the time you're listening to this, to have a shvacha shachris. Today is a day to have a mincha, Purim Yom Kippurim. Today is a day to be mispalel. And kol haposhit yada yinasin lo. My cousin suggested that maybe it's an atzas hayetzer, that people get drunk and memela the davening goes out the window because the Satan is afraid of our tefillahs today. So Rabbi Sai, today is a day to have a smile on your face. Today is a day to have emunah and betachon, to trust that the Rabbeinu Shalom is pulling the strings, and even the things that look scary and even the things that look dangerous, the Rabbeinu Shalom is setting up everything l'toivaisenu, like the pur of Haman. Ki pur, Haman's pur was nepach lepurenu. He made a pur that he thought was for his benefit. It was nepach lepurenu. It ended up being for our benefit. So too, everything that's happening, all of the things that look scary and sound scary and everything else, they 1,000% could be lepurenu. It all could be for our good and for our tova. So go out today, be misameach, give shevach v'aidah to the Rabbeinu Shalom for the nisim shasa nisim laviseinu bayama mahem bizman hazeh. Be mispal to the Rabbeinu Shalom that the Rabbeinu Shalom should take care of us now the same way he took care of us then. And Amir Hashem, in the schus of Klal Yisrael's avodah, remember that tefillah is b'makam avodah, or nishalma parmis faseinu. In the schus of Klal Yisrael's avodah, and in the schus of Klal Yisrael's betachon, the Rabbeinu Shalom will bring, no doubt, the Rabbeinu Shalom will bring the geula shlema b'mehera v'yameinu. Now, Megillah. The Megillah tells us that at the end of the story, there's a pasuk that we all learn out loud together. Umardechai yatsa milifnei hamelech bilavush malchus tcheles v'achur v'ateres zahav gidayla v'sachrich butz v'argamon v'ir shushan salav v'samecha. Mordechai went out from before Achashverosh wearing levush malchus. He was wearing kingly clothing. What was he wearing? Tcheles. Well, we know that tcheles, the special blue dye that we use for our tzitzis, tcheles was a color of malchus. Achronim bring down that there was a time when there was a gzeira where Yidden couldn't make tcheles because tcheles was reserved for royalty. So Mordechai had tchelis, kingly clothing. Vachur, white clothing. Chur, the shirish, at least in Aramaic, chevar, is white. The Gemara always says, mechavrosa kideresh lakish. People teach it colloquially. They say, we go back like Reish Lakish, right? Sometimes you have the one mandiyam in the Gemara gives a teretz, then there's a different teretz, then there's a different teretz, then the Gemara slugs up teretz number 2 and teretz number 3, and the Gemara says, machvarta kitishanina meikara. People teach it, we go back to the first teretz. That's not what it means. And the word is not machvarta, it's mechavrosa. And it means it is clear. Because chevar is white or clear. So he was wearing tcheles. He was wearing tcheles clothing. Vachur, white clothing. V'aterezav gedola, a great golden crown. V'sachrich butz v'argamon, and a robe made out of linen and purple wool. V'ha'ir shushan salav v'samecha. Says the Gra. Beautiful Gra here. The Gra says, Levush Malchus? Mordechai was wearing the Levush Malchus. What was this Levush Malchus exactly? Says the Gra. Pirush, Rabbi Isai. What's Levush Malchus? Talis shel mitzvah. You want to know what Levush Malchus is? Levush Malchus is not $1,000 suit. Levush Malchus is not a tux. Levush Malchus is not royal purple robes. Levush Malchus is what we wear every day. Pirush, says the Gra, talis shel mitzvah. When you wear your talis, that is a Levush Malchus. Kemoisha kasav b'zayar, like it says in the Zayar, atifa de malchusa. What does it mean, Levush Malchus? Atifa de malchusa, a wrapping of Malchus. Lehis atef batzitzis. Tcheles, Mordechai was wearing tcheles, who tcheles shebetzitzis. It's a reference to the tcheles of the tzitzits. Vachur, white, hu halavan shebetzitzis. We know that properly made tzitzits, aliba de hilchasa, is a combination of tcheles and chur, white strings and blue strings. So tcheles is the tzitzis. Vachur, hu halavan shebetzitzis. V'aterezav gedola, what's the great golden crown? He tefillin shebaroish. Oiter Yisrael b'sefara is the tefillin that we wear. Says the Umas Ha'olam, they'll see ki shem Hashem nikra alecha v'yaru mimeka. They'll see that we carry the name of Hashem on our heads. That's the tefillin sharoish. V'sachrich butz. What's a sachrich butz? I touched it for you. Tachrich is a robe. Tachrich butz v'argaman, a robe of linen and purple wool. Says the Gra, tachrich, the shirish of tachrich is korach. What's korach? You know that sandwich that we eat Pesach by night? Today, by the way, shloshim yom kodem l'chag, 30 days before Pesach. Shayel and v'darshin b'hilchos chag. We have to talk about Hilchos Pesach today. Korach, what's korach? It's our sandwich. Our wrap. Remember, Hillel had soft matzah, not like our hard matzah. He made a wrap out of alafa, aka matzah, and maror, and carbon pesach. So it's a wrap. So tachrich, the shirish is like korach, is a wrap. So says the Gra, tachrich butz. Butz is white linen. Heim haritzuos shekarchin bahem. That is a remez to the ritzuos of the tefillin. Perhaps butz, because typically the backside of the ritzuos were white, even though nowadays many people have the black on black ones too. I'm not tagar on those. I myself wear those, but maybe that's why tachrich butz. V'argamon hein tefillah shel yad. The argamon is the tefillin shel yad. Why? How's argamon? What does argamon purple have to do with tefillin shel yad? So the Gra says, ki mi tefillah shel roish le tefillah shel yad arba'a dargin. I'm not exactly sure what that means. But okay. So argamon, so says the Gra, Mordechai yotzal milafnei melech bilevush malchus. What is the levush malchus, Rabbi Isai? Talis, tzitzis, that's the levush malchus. Ma inyan Shemitah Eitzel Har Sinai. What does that have to do with today? Well, welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph. We'll be learning today, Mir Hashem, Daf Yud Gimel Amid Beis. And here on Yud Gimel Amid Aleph, we are beginning a brand new Siman. Siman Ches in Shulchan Aruch, Hilchos Tzizis v'Atifasai. The halachas of Tzitzis and the manner in which you're supposed to properly do the atifa, the wrapping of yourself in the tzitzis. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Yesatef b'tzitzis, you should wrap yourself in your tzitzis, and we're going to see what that means. V'yavarech, and you should make the bracha on the tzitzis, and you should do them both mu'umad. You should put on the tzitzis, and you should make the bracha on the tzitzis mu'umad while you are standing. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Aleph. Yesatef b'tzitzis, you should put on your tzitzis. When precisely should you put on your tzitzis? Says the Mishnah Berurah, miyad achar netilas yadayim. You should put on the tzitzis right after netilas yadayim. In Sha'ar Tziyah Ois Katan Aleph, the Chavetz Chaim brings this down from the Magen Avram. The Magen Avram says, when you should you put on your tzitzis? Right after netilas yadayim. Why not before netilas yadayim? Why do you specifically have to put on your tefillin after netilas yadayim? So we have two possible reasons. One, the Chavetz Chaim is bringing this down from the Magen Avram. Now, the Magen Avram back in Siman Daled, if you remember, we learned the halacha, the Mishnah Berurah brought down, that a person should not take his malbushim in the morning. He should not have his mishares, his servant, hand him his tzitzis in the morning before washing netilas yadayim, before the servant washed netilas yadayim. And the Magen Avram says over there that really even you yourself should not touch your malbushim. You shouldn't touch your clothing before netilas yadayim. I believe this is also based on the issue of the ruach hara, that's shiur on the yadayim. You don't want the ruach hara somehow transferring to the malbushim. Therefore, it makes perfect sense that the Magen Avram over here says also, don't put on your talis until you wash the netilas yadayim. Now, one thing that we're going to struggle with over here, right away people are wondering, talis? I put on my talis in shul. I don't put on my talis at home. So what does this mean, put on my talis right after the netilas yadayim? Well, I would venture to guess that we are referring over here not necessarily to the talis that we think about, the talis that we put on shul for davening. But this was a talis that people wore on a constant basis. It was a dalit kanfais beged of some kind, and it had tzitzis on it. So this is kind of like part of his getting dressed. So put on the talis when? After netilas yadayim. Another reason why you should put on the talis after netilas yadayim specifically is if you're putting on a talis that has tzitzis on it, you got to make a bracha, lehisatef batzitzis. Now, your hands, when you wake up in the morning, are pasal lebracha. Why? Because according to the Rosh, they're not stam yodayim. We learned earlier that stam yodayim, your hands, if you're not aware that your hands are unclean in any way, so they have the status of stam yodayim are not psulus lebracha. But according to the Rosh, when you wake up in the morning, your hands are not stam yodayim. Your yodayim are vadayim miluchlachim, because yodayim askani yisayim, and you touched an unclean part of your body during the night when you were sleeping. So you can't make a bracha. But you have to make a bracha before you put on the talis. So you got to wash the netilas yadayim first. So again, said the Mishnah Berurah here, when should you put on the tzitzis? Miyad achar netilas yadayim. And, says the Chavetz Chaim, it's very, very important that you should put on your tzitzis right away. Why? Kedei shelo yelech arba amos b'lo tzitzis. So that you should not walk dalet amos without tzitzis. Now, this is very interesting. Is there an isser to walk dalet amos without tzitzis? I mean, a lot of people, they'll say right away, what do you mean? The mitzvah I say of tzitzis is, if you're wearing a beged of talud kanfais, you're wearing a four-cornered garment, you have to put on tzitzis. But if I'm not wearing a beged shel talud kanfais, I don't even need tzitzis. So what is this problem of walking dalet amos without tzitzis? Yet the Chavetz Chaim is very clear. The Chavetz Chaim says, put on your tzitzis right away. Why? Kedei shelo yelech arba amos beloy tzitzis, so that a mensch should not go 4 amos without tzitzis. Gemara, Shabbos, Daf Kuf Yud Ches Amid Beis. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman, Teisi li, I should receive schar. I should receive olam haba. Why? Dekaimis mitzvahs tzitzis. Because I am mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis. So Rav Nachman is saying, he's not saying I do basic halacha. He's saying teisi li, I should get a special schar. Why? Because I'm mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis. Everybody has to be mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis. What do they mean teisi li? Because you're mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis. If you wear a beged of dal kanfus, you got to put on tzitzis. It's the mitzvah say daraisa. Anybody who doesn't do it is mavatal on asay. So you mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis, that if you put on a beged of dal kanfus, you put on tzitzis. For that you want special reward. Why? Was kommt dem special reward? Says Rashi. What does it mean? Shelo yahalach arba amos beloy tefillin. An earlier Amora said without tefillin. V'chein le'inyan tzitzis. What Rav Nachman was saying was teisi li, I should get special schar because forget the basic mitzvah of tzitzis. I never went dalid amos without tzitzis. Says the Gemara weiter. Amalei Rav Yosef braid the Rabbah. Rav Yosef commented to Rav Yosef, the son of Rabbah, and he said, Avuch, your father, Rabbah, b'mai zohir tfei. Tell me something that he was extra special nizar in. Said Rav Yosef, the son of Rabbah, Amalei b'tzitzis. He was very, very careful with the mitzvah of tzitzis. Dugma, what's a mashal of how careful he was with the mitzvah of tzitzis? Yom echad have a kasolik bedarga. One day he was going up the steps. Ifsik lechuta. He maybe stepped on a string and his string ripped. So string ripped off his tzitzis. Doesn't even say that it was puzzle. Realize that 99.9% of the time, if you rip off one string of your tzitzis aren't puzzle. So it doesn't say even that his tzitzis were puzzle, but a string ripped off. V'loy nachis va'asa. He would not move. Kama d'loy ramya. Until it was fixed. Rabbi say, I may have said this before. I believe that in our dar, by the youngsters nowadays, there is a geferlicha atzas hayetzer. You know, Chazal tell us that Klal Yisrael is nimshal to a rimoin. Why? Because afilu harei kanin bohem, even the ones that are empty. What does that mean they're empty? Amaratzim. Even Amaratzim. They don't learn Torah. They're not so nizer and shmiras mitzvahs because they don't know. They don't know halacha. Even the Amaratzim, afilu harei kanin shebehem, malayim mitzvahs karimoin. They're full of mitzvahs like a rimoin. The way a pomegranate is full of seeds, the reikanin behem, the Amaratzim, are full of mitzvahs like a rimoin. How are they full of mitzvahs like a rimoin if they're Amaratzim? I'll tell you how, Rabbi say. They get up in the morning, Shma b'ni musar avicha v'al titaish tarasi mecha. They heard their mother all the years. Are you wearing tzitzis? Did you remember to put on your tzitzis? So they get up in the morning, they put on tzitzis. They might not even know why they put on tzitzis. They walk around the whole day with a beged of daled kanfus with tzitzis. They're being mekayim mitzvahs every second. Amaratzim, they don't learn daf yomi, they don't learn mishnah yomi. They might make mistakes in a lot of their shmiras Torah mitzvahs, but they wear tzitzits every minute, every day. They're malayim mitzvahs karimoin. Automatic mitzvahs. The Yetzer Hara can't stand it. Automatic mitzvahs. A yid is walking around all day wearing tzitzis. Automatic mitzvahs. Geferlich. Schusim, schusim, schusim. Schar, schar, schar. The Yetzer Hara can't abide it. The Yetzer Hara has come along, Rabbi Isai, and the Yetzer Hara has crept into the teenagers, and the Yetzer Hara has said, was darfman, we have to wear tzitzis. Tzitzis is only if you're wearing a baggage of daled canvas. You know, it's hot, it's uncomfortable, it's another layer. You know, you're going out to work, you're doing physical labor, you're going to get sweated up. It's not b'kavadik, b'shmeh. The Yetzer Hara cannot abide that Yidden are generating automatic schusim and automatic mitzvahs. Malayim mitzvahs kirimayin. Person should put on his tzitzis first thing in the morning. Shelo yelech dalet amos b'lo tzitzis. He shouldn't walk dalet amos without tzitzis. Without that begin malchus. Without the tchelas v'chur. Without those automatic schusim. Without the laman tizkeru v'asisem es kol mitzvaysai. Without the remembrance of the Ol Malchus Shamayim. Without the reminder for the mitzvahs. Without the Veloisa Suru Acharei Lavavachem Acharei Einechem Asher Atem Zoinem Achareim. Without that protection, don't go Dalet Amos. Chas v'chalil, we shouldn't let this kalus creep in, and we have to fight it b'chal asar v'asar. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and bays, mu'umid. We're supposed to put on the tzitzis and make the bracha while we're standing. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what the Mechaber wants to say is both ha'atifa v'habracha shtein ba'amida. The wrapping ourselves in the tzitzis and making the bracha should both be while standing. Why? Ha'atifa, we should put on the tzitzis while standing. We should diksiv lachem, because in the context of tzitzis, the Torah Dirshu uses the word lachem. It's your beged. V'alfinan gzeres shaveh, and we learn out gzeres shaveh me omer from the mitzvah of the omer. Diksiv gamkein lachem. The pasuk says in the context of the carbon omer, it also uses the word lachem. Uba omer ksiv, and by the omer it says mehachel chermesh bakama. When you begin to use the sickle on the standing grain, bakama. V'darshinon bakoima, and we darshin bakoima while standing. That's where we learn that when you mekayim the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer, you're supposed to do it standing. Because it says, Hachel Chermesh Bakama, and we read it Bakoima. And we learn out from there in Gzeres Shaveh, Lachem Lachem to Tzitzis, that Tzitzis should also be done while standing. So that's as far as putting on the Tzitzis. Va'bracha, and as far as the bracha on the Tzitzis, well, that, the Chavetz Chaim says, is a hard, fast rule. Mishum dechol brechas hamitzvahs, anytime we make brechas hamitzvahs, like al Mikra Megillah, tzarich lihiyos ba'amida. Brechas hamitzvahs are always supposed to be recited while standing. V'hu rak lechatchila. However, all of this is only lechatchila. De b'di'eved yotza b'shtein v'chol gavni. B'di'eved, meaning, if it's difficult for you for whatever reason, b'di'eved yoyotza, if you put it on while sitting, if you make the bracha while sitting, gzeres shaveh. The answer is it's not a real gzeres shaveh. It's not a gzeres shaveh daraisa. It's an asmachta ba'alma. And the majority of Achrayim agree. You're supposed to make the bracha on putting on the talis, on putting on the tzitzits, before you actually put them on. When you're holding the talis, you're holding the tzitzits, and you're about to put them on, that's when you make the bracha. Because that is right before you're accomplishing the mitzvah. We always make a brichas ha-mitzvahs as close as possible to the kiyam ha-mitzvah. So we make the bracha on the tzitzis or on the talis when we're about to put it on. Don't make the bracha while your talis is folded. You take your folded talis out of your talis bag. Don't make the bracha now and now unfold it and put it on. Tizehu oiver da oiver, because that's before you put it on. You have to make the bracha over lasiyasam, right before you put it on. Okay, says the Mechaber Sif Beis, 2 lines off the bottom, Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Seder atifasai, the proper way to put on the talis. Kederech b'nei adam, it's in the normal way that people wear such a garment. Shemiskasim biksusam va'oiskim b'malachtam, people wear their garment, and they wear their garment throughout the day, no matter what they're busy with, even if they're busy working. Pa'amim b'kisei harosh, sometimes they have the head covered. Pa'amim b'gilei harosh, and sometimes they have their head uncovered. Now, what the Mechaber is addressing over here is a famous machlokes between the Shita Hagaonim and the Shita of the Baal HaItur. If you take a look at the Be'er HaGoyla Ois Cotton Bays over here, you'll see that the Mechaber is bringing this down from the Baal HaItur. What's the machlokes? The machlokes is, we know that Chazal told us that when we put on a talis, we make a bracha asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu lihis atef batzitzis. The bracha is on wrapping ourselves in the tzitzis. Atifa. What is atifa? What does that mean? Well, the primary source that we have for the description of atifa is a Gemara that many of us learned in Daf Yomi not all that long ago. Mayit Katan Daf Chav Dalid Amid. I'm gonna say Chav Dalid Amid Beis. Gemara Mayit Katan Chav Dalid Amid Beis, where it talks about an oval, and it says that an oval has to be nisatef. An oval has to wrap himself. And the Gemara over there says, what is ituf? Ka'atifas yishma'elim. It's a member from Shmuel. Ein atifa ela ka'atifas yishma'elim. What's atifas yishma'elim? So the Gemara, Rashi over there describe somebody who has his head covered. I should have brought up a talus. Hang on 1 second. I'll be right there. Tony Menachem, somebody? Could you bring me a talus? Open up the metal cabinet in my study, top shelf. Just bring me a talus. Okay, Rabbi said, we got a talus on the way. Okay, so Atifas Yishma'elim, the Gemara over there explains based on Rashi. Rashi says Atifas Yishma'elim is covering up the head, and you cover the head and you bring the talus down. Thank you so much, right-hand man. Okay, so here we have a talus. So the Gemara says like this, at least according to Rashi. The Gemara says, you take the talus, don't worry, I'm going to sit down so you can see. You take the talus, you put it over your head, and you bring it down until the mouth, so that the hollows of the cheeks are covered with the talus. That's what's called Atifas Yishma'elim. So Atifas Yishma'elim requires that the head be covered. Therefore, the Ga'onim hold that Atifa for a talus, you want to make a bracha lehis atef batzitzis, that Atifa requires that the head be covered. That's the Shitas HaGa'onim brought down in the Torah. But the Bala Iter disagrees. The Bala Iter says no. Atifa in the context of an oval, you're right, an oval has to cover his head. But Atifas Yishma'elim, not Atifas Yishma'elim, but Atifa for tzitzits is enough if you cover the body, if you wrap the body. You don't have to wrap the head. And one of the things that the Bala Iter bases that on is the Bala Iter says in the psukim that discuss the mitzvah of tzitzis, what does it say? It says al kanfei bigdehem. It says your beged. It says asher techasaboy, the cloak that you cover yourself with. It doesn't talk about the roish. It never talks about the roish. And a beged, not every beged covers the head. So the Bala Iter says that you do not have to wrap your head in order to be yotze the mitzvah of tzitzis, in order to make the bracha on tzitzis. So here we have this machlokes, the Ga'onim and the Bala Iter. The Mechaber paskins like the Bala Iter. So that's why the Mechaber says over here in Siv Beis, Seder atifasa kiderech b'nei adam shebiskasi b'ksusam v'oiskim b'malachtam. The proper way to accomplish atifa is in the normal way of wearing a beged, where sometimes your head is covered and sometimes your head is not covered. It's not necessary to cover the head in order to be mekayim the atifa of tzitzis. But the Mechaber continues, if you turn to Yud Gimel Amud Beis, v'nachain, however, it is proper sheyechase roisha b'talis, that you should cover your head with your talis. Why does the Mechaber say that? Because the Mechaber says we should be machmer to cover the shitas ha'ga'onim as well. Now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah back on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Mishnah Berurah is Katan Gimel. Begilui harosh explains the Chavetz Chaim. Da'afal gavdim avarchina lehis atef, because even though the bracha we make is lehis atef batzitzis, to wrap ourselves in the tzitzis, says the Chavetz Chaim, and again, he's going according to the sheet of the Bala Iter, kisui haguf lechudei heavy ituf, covering the guf alone, without covering the head, is also considered ituf. That's the shita of the Bala Iter, v'hu ikar ha'ituf, and that is the ikar of atifa. The ikar of atifa is wrapping the beged around the guf, not necessarily the head. Okay, that's what the Mishnah Berurah says so far. Now the Mishnah Berurah makes a slightly tangential point. Says the Mishnah Berurah, va'ovrei drachim, people who are traveling, and maybe they do this because they're traveling and roads are dusty and they get dirty, etc., etc. Shamanichin atalis kishuhu mekupel. They take the talus while it's folded up. Let me grab the talus over here. They grab the talus while it's all folded up and scrunched up. Umishalshalim saviv tzavaram al kispehen, and they take the whole talus while it's all folded and wrapped, etc., etc. Maybe they don't want to drag it on the floor. Now, I'll swing around over here. You'll see there's nothing hanging down on my back. I've got the whole talus just around my neck. Al kispehen. You cannot be yoitz the chiv of tzitzis because that is certainly not atifa. You're not wrapping your body, you're not wrapping your head, you're not wrapping anything if you do that. So that is certainly not atifa. So what do we have here so far? So we had the machlokes, the Gaonim and the Bala Iter. The Gaonim hold that in order to accomplish atifa, you must wrap the talus around your head and your body. Body is not sufficient. Bala Iter says body is sufficient. You do not need the head. Mechaber paskins like the Bala Iter, but he says it would be proper to cover the head with the talus to be yoitze the shitas hagaonim as well. What did we see over here so far in the Mishnah Berurah? One point the Mishnah Berurah made was those prayer shawls that just go around the neck. That's nothing. That's not atifa. You can't make a bracha on that. It would be a bracha of HaTorah, Rabbi say. It would be a bracha of HaTorah, and you zikr not yoitze anything by doing that, even if you don't use a prayer shawl, even if you use a bona fide talus. But if you just take it and drape it around your neck and over your shoulders, you can't make a bracha of HaTorah, and you're certainly not yoitze anything. Now, let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Daled. Very interesting Mishnah Berurah. I'm going to try to demonstrate what this means based on, you know what, maybe I should get a helper in here. Yeshua Matanya? Okay, I'm going to need a video assistant. Yeah. Okay, what's going to happen over here is I'm going to stand up. Yeah. I'm going to need you to take the camera. All right? Okay. You're going to have to pick the camera up, and you're going to have to look. You have to be somewhere where you can see the screen. The challenge is going to be to get me while I'm standing. Okay, not yet. Okay? So, Mishnah Berurah Chelik Daled. The Mechaber said, it would be proper to cover the head with the talus as well, to be yoitze the shitas hagaonim. Now, the Mishnah Berurah is going to discuss how to properly put on a talus. Says the Mishnah Berurah. First he says, why do you have to cover your head with the talus? Besides being mekayim the shita of the gaonim, that's only be'es the bracha. When you're making the bracha and you're making the atifa, there's an inyan to wrap it around your head to be yoitze the shitas hagaonim. But the Mechaber says it's proper to cover your head with the talus, period. He doesn't say just when you make the bracha. Explains to Mishnah Berurah why, because that brings out hachna. That's humble. You cover your head. It's machnia you. So machnia leva adam umevia lida Yerushalayim. It brings Yerushalayim. V'ayin b'taz, he says, take a look at the Taz. The daitoi, it's the opinion of the Taz, and many people make a mistake based on this Taz. The nachin, not based on the Taz, but based on the limited amount of the Taz that the Mishnah Berurah brings down. V'ayin b'taz, shedaitoi, it's his opinion. The nachin shalo yaser ha'kayva ha'katan sha'al roishay be'es ha'tfilah. The Taz says, you're by davening, you're going to take your talus, you're going to put your talus over your head, your hat, take your yarmulke off. Taz says, no. Don't take off the yarmulke. Have the yarmulke and the talus. So a lot of people look at that and they say, oh, there's an inyan of shtei kisuyim. You're supposed to have two coverings, a yarmulke and a talus. If you look at the Taz says you shouldn't take off the yarmulke. You know why? Because the talus has a habit of slipping off your head. Back then, I guess they didn't have the no-slip glue on the strings. They didn't have all of those options. So they didn't have the no slip talis. So the talis has a nasty habit of slipping off your head. Says the Taz, if you're not wearing a yarmulke, the talis slips off your head, you're going to be begilui roish. And the Taz is very makbid on gilui roish. The Taz says you're not allowed to be begilui roish even for a second. So he says, keep the yarmulke on. So if the talis slips off, you're not begilui roish. So v'ayin betaz, shedaita the nachat shelo yosser hakayv hakatan shal roisha beis hatfila, afshu mechazer roisha batalis gamke. Because of Bach says, the tzarech shigehei atalis al roishai, the properly your talis should be on your head mitchilas hatfila at sofa, from the beginning of davening until the end. I have to look up this Bach. Tefillah usually means Shemona Esrei. Does the Bach mean only Shemona Esrei, or does he mean davening as a whole? I have to take a look at the Bach. Certainly, when you make the bracha on the talis and do the atifa, you should have the talis on your head at least for the amount of time it takes to walk 4 amos. Why? Because that's a zman choshev. That's a choshev amount of time. And we want you to be yoytze the shitas ha'ga'onim that holds that the atifa has to be on your head, because if not, you made a bracha levatala. You're not yoytze atifa, according to the ga'onim, without wrapping the talis on your head. Kosev bekavanos. It says in the Sefer Shar Kavanos, which is from the Ari, Zichrayna Levracha, Hayamachasa HaTalis al Tefillin Shel Rosh. The Ari would have the talis cover up the top of the Tefillin Shel Rosh. Vayin Tzayv Siman Chav Zayin Dal Kolpanim Lo Yechasa Legamri, but it shouldn't cover it completely. Now, here comes the punchline over here. How do you put on a talis? B'shas atifa, at the time that you do the atifa, mechase roishay ba'atalis ad sheyagia ad pif. Okay, what you're supposed to do, the way the Mishnah Berurah explains it, okay, we're going to take the talis, you put it over your head, and you bring it down until your mouth. So it's covering up your head, your forehead, your nose, maybe your mustache if you have one, and it goes all the way down to your mouth. That's the first thing the Mishnah Berurah says over here. He says, then, umashlich kol ha'arba tzitzis, you gather up the 4 corners, and you take them and you throw them litzad smoil to the left side. And you hold it that way, kidei hiluch arba amos, for the amount of time it takes to walk 4 amos. Now, take a look if you could get the camera, and you could get me over here. Pull it up. Okay, that's good. Perfect. So what he's describing, and by the way, if I look like I don't know what I'm doing, even though Baruch Hashem, I'm married for a long time, a little bit lower, okay, it's because I don't put on my talis this way, and I'll tell you why in a couple of minutes. So he says, you bring down the talis until it comes to your mouth. Now, you take the 4 corners, 1, 2, see, I know how to count. 3, even on Purim I know how to count. 3, I need 4. Okay, 4. Okay, so now I've got my 4 corners. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says, just, you throw it to the left. Now, by doing that, what did I accomplish by doing that? You see, right now, I'm not really wrapped. Can you see me? Yeah. I'm not really wrapped right now. But if I do this, now I have wrapped it around me. Now note that the Mishnah Berurah doesn't say anything about throwing it over the shoulder, but that is brought down to throw it over the left shoulder. Not just to throw it like that, but to throw it like that. I'm wondering if the reason for that is because take a look at the difference. This compared to that. Which one is a better wrapping? Now, I have a funny feeling that there's also different Kabbalah involved over here, which is beyond my pay grade. But that's, be that as it may, that's what it says, okay? Now, let's take the camera. Sorry for the earthquakes, Rabbi Isai. Bear with me. 1 second. Okay, clip that on properly. And we'll see if that's good. A little bit down. Okay, yeah, that's good. This is not because I'm shikker. I didn't drink nearly enough, and I've never gotten shikker in my life, by the way. Chayv adam l'vsume b'poryeh doesn't necessarily mean you have to get shikker. We spoke about that when we learned Hilchos Megillah. Okay, so the Mishnah Berurah said over here, and hold the wrapping that way for the amount of time that it takes to walk Dalet Amis at least. So that's the Zman Choshev that you need to be Yotza the Atifa. Then you open up this wrapping that you just did so that the tefillin shel rosh could be seen somewhat. And then you put all four corners of the tzitzis in their proper places. That it's important to keep the front tzitzis in the front, the back tzitzis in the back. This atifa, says the Mishnah Berurah, is efficacious, it is proper, you yotze the mitzvah, and you can make a bracha on this style of atifa, l'kulei alma, according to everybody. Not like the way some people do. He says some people take the talis, they don't bring it down to their mouth, they take the talis and they bring it down like this. He says that is not an atifa. That's not called an atifa. And he says, if you want to see the basis for everything I just discussed, take a look at my Katan Chav Daled Amud Aleph. I said before Amud Beis, I guess it's Amud Aleph, where the Gemara talks in the context of Avelos, of Atifas Yishmaelim. And Rashi describes Atifas Yishmaelim, that you take the talus and you bring it down until the hollows of the cheeks, not that you bring it down until here. Mashma Gemara, the mashmais of the Gemara in Kedushin is Shebacher Loya Mechasa Roisha Betalis. Oh, what, Yishua Matanya? I do need you. Yeah. I need you for one more thing. Mashma Gemara, it's Mashma the Gemara Kedushin Chavtesam the Beis Shebacher Loya Mechasa Roisha Betalis, that a single bacher, someone who's not married, does not cover his head with the talis afilu hu Talmid Chacham, even if he's a Talmid Chacham. Now, we're not going to go weiter because it's already going long and it is Purim, but I want to show you, I told you I don't put on my talis that way. Why don't I put on my talis that way? Well, you see, Rashi, I told you Rashi in my cotton says that you take the talis and you bring it to the hollows of the cheeks. Now, most people understand that as meaning that you take the talis from the top down. You put it over the head and bring it down until the mouth. Now, there's a very powerful kasha. I think one of the earliest places you find this kasha is in the Tzizis. There's a very powerful kasha on that. And that is, what's the kasha? How is that atifas Yishmaelim? You're telling me that that's the way a Yishmaeli, that's the way an Arab covers himself, and that's the way they dress. So you're telling me that a Yishmaeli dresses like this. Now, Yishua Matani, what's wrong with this?
You could probably see perfectly. Right?
Yeah, right. He's saying that if I get an eye exam right now, yeah, I'm going to flunk. And if there's a rock in front of me, I'm going to break my neck. So the Tzais asks, how could that be Atifas Yishmaelim? Can't be. So therefore, there are those that suggest, amongst them the Aruch HaShulchan and others, that it doesn't mean from the top down. It means from the bottom up. How do you do from the bottom up? So if my able-bodied assistant will take the camera again. Okay. Good. Okay, hold it there. No, a little higher. Drop higher. Okay. So when they say higher, higher, point it like down towards me. No. Up a little bit more. Okay, got it. Perfect. They say like this. You take the talus and you cover your head until your eyes. So like this. Okay. Then you do this. Now, you take the right side, like we said before in the Mishnah Berurah, you take the right and you throw it over the left. So I'm going to take the right side, and I take this, and I cover up until the hollows of my cheeks, meaning over my mouth. So the top of the talus is coming down until my eyes. The bottom is going up until my eyes. This is Atifas Yishmaelim. I have my head covered, I have my body wrapped, I'm covered till the hollows of my cheeks, and I could still see. That is the way, it's what it sounds like from the Aruch HaShulchan, that's the way Rav Moshe, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha, put on his talus. And I'll tell you something fascinating. I have a relative whose father-in-law was a Talmud of the Chavetz Chaim. He learned in Radin by the Chavetz Chaim. And this cousin told me in the name of his father-in-law, he says, what the Mishnah Berurah writes in Mishnah Berurah Siman Ches Ois Cotton Dalid, notwithstanding, he says, I was in Radin, and I saw the Chavetz Chaim put on his talus. And the Chavetz Chaim put on his talus like Rav Moshe. That's what this Yid told me. He was in his upper 90s at the time. His mind was sharp as a tack. Interesting, he lived until he was 102. And he lived in good health until 102. And people would ask him, Bameh erachta yamim, what gave you arichas yamim? And he said, I have no suffix. I know exactly what gave me arichas yamim. He said, what? He said, we all know now from the famous picture of the Chavetz Chaim that the Chavetz Chaim was very short. Interesting, a lot of Gdolim were very short. Rav Moshe, also very short. So the Chavetz Chaim was very short. And he used to leave his talis and tefillin on his desk in the Mismedrash. And one night, the Eino Yehudi, who was cleaning up the Mismedrash, took the Chavetz Chaim's talis and tefillin and put them up on top of the Svarim shrine. Now this Yid that I knew, he had a Seder before davening. So he came into the Mismedrash before davening and he was sitting and learning. And then the Chavetz Chaim came in. The Chavetz Chaim came in. His talis and tefillin weren't on the desk. He starts looking for a talis and tefillin. He sees his talis and tefillin up in the Shemayim over there on top of the Svarim shrine. How's he going to get it? So this fellow, who was a bacher at the time, ran over, climbed up on a chair, climbed up, reached up, got the Chavetz Chaim's talis and tefillin, and gave him the talis and tefillin. He says the Chavetz Chaim took his hand in both his hands and said, Sollst du sein gesund? You should be healthy. He said, I heard it from the Chavetz Chaim, and I said, Amen. That's why I have arichas yamim, because the Chavetz Chaim gave me a bracha that I should be healthy, and I said, Amen. So I'm healthy. And he was fine. I mean, he had a heart condition, but he was okay. He was good until he was 102. And he passed away, I think, if I remember correctly, in his sleep. And he didn't have any prolonged illnesses or anything else. So, again, here we have the Chavetz Chaim has told us how to properly put on a talus. I demonstrated it for you. I demonstrated how I put on a talus according to the minig of the Yeshiva Zatzal. And I have this beautiful story for the Chavetz Chaim. Could be the Chavetz Chaim describes it here in the way he does. Puk chazim ayam adabar. It's very possible that this was much more common. This was the more commonplace way of putting on a talus. And the Chavetz Chaim was writing a sefer for the masses. So, okay, it's not like it doesn't have what to base it on. The Chavetz Chaim didn't say it on his own. He said over here, who did he bring it down from? Who does he bring it down from? That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, but in any case, everyone should have a wonderful Simcha Dika Purim, and we should be zeicha to see the chasadim of the Rebbeinu Shalom over and over and over again. We should realize the tremendous hashkacha pratis that exists in the world. The Rebbeinu Shalom, there's not one world leader anywhere that has an ounce of power. Hashem ishbalchama Hashem shemai. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the manig, who bayrei umanig is kala olam kulai, umanig lechol habruim. The Rebbeinu Shalom is manig everything that happens everywhere. Every bullet, every missile, every plane, every tank, every pebble. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the bayrei umanig. So we are completely in the hands of the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom is a meitiv. The Rebbeinu Shalom is a goyim l'chasadim. We should nutz ois the tremendous power of Purim in Torah utfila. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be megan on Gans Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshuas, Refuas, Parnasa, Chiduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the Bias Tzedek, B'mehera v'yameinu, Amen. Be well.